My name is Ahmed Best. Um, I don't necessarily have a title. I mean, professor maybe is probably the closest academic title that I have. I'm an artist, and I come at bioengineering from the storytelling world. And it really is, and I always tell this to Drew, like I didn't go to school for science, but I love it so much that I call myself like a science hobbyist. And most people look at hobbies like, you know, building model ships or, you know what I'm saying, or like learning how to play the guitar. I'm really more about like diving into some serious scientific ideas and professionally, I try to be as communicative as possible when it comes to science and when it comes to talking to people about it. I tend to live in these two worlds of, you know, as an artist, as a performing artist, and somebody who does like film and TV for a living, and theater for a living, and games. You know, I also write and direct video games. I have an ability to communicate scientific ideas emotionally, and be able to get across those ideas by scientists so people can understand what they're passionate about. You know, a lot of times when we talk about science, we talk about scientists, we're talking about the opinions of the data, right? With, through the science, and not the passion of why scientists actually started doing this in the first place, right? So scientists are really kind of reduced to these people who spit data, and there's just so much more to it than that. When it comes to bioengineering, especially when it comes to like the reason why I know you, and the reason why Drew Endy is such a dear friend, is because the way Drew comes at bioengineering is so incredibly creative and accessible. And it doesn't frighten you, it excites you. And every time people talk about biology or bioengineering or synthetic biology, everyone gets afraid, right? And so talking to Drew, you're more amazed, you're more fascinated, and you're more afraid. And I just want to amplify that message, you know, especially when it comes to talking about things as important as bioengineering. You know, loved I've always loved science since I was a kid. You know, I grew up in New York City. I was a very nerdy kid. I read a lot of comic books, but I really, all my science classes from elementary school were my favorite classes. And I remember, you know, I'm a slight bit older than you, but I remember when they my science teacher in fifth grade wheeled a computer into the room, and I was hooked. I was hooked ever since I first saw it, right? And it was a Commodore PET. I don't know if anybody even knows what the hell that. This was like before the Commodore 64, which was like the computer of the 80s, right?
Yeah.
But this was like a Commodore PET, and the first language that I learned was called BASIC. I don't even know if BASIC even exists anymore. But I remember like doing this really super simple string script in BASIC, and it was just my name. You know, I would just put my name in there, and then the entire screen like filled with my name, and it scrolled infinitely. And I was just amazed. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And so I just wanted to be a part of whatever was going on. And, you know, computer science was the science class, right? And then when I got to high school, it was like physics, and I was just blown away by physics. And I wanted to go into physics if it wasn't for like music and acting really called me, because I was going the science way, right? And when I was in high school, they made you choose, and I didn't want to choose. You know, I really wanted to do it all because I saw the relationship between science and the arts. And, you know, historically, back in the ancient times, it was the same thing. You know, artists and scientists were one and the same. And it wasn't until, you know, a lot later in the like, you know, late 18th, 19th century that it got separated into these two different schools of thought, right? But I always kept a little toe in the science world. You know, I always had friends who were scientists. I always talked to them. I'm intensely like curious. I always want to know something. I'm always fascinated by things, and I love learning. Like I'm a huge learner. So I get science newsletters every 5 minutes, and I always have. And I had been doing a lot of work with the National Academy of Science. I was doing um, I host events for the National Academy of Sciences Science and Entertainment Exchange, right? Which is it's a small department in the National Academy of Science that provides scientists with storytellers, right? So all the hard science that's in every movie that comes from the Science and Entertainment Exchange, right? So they connect scientists and movie producers, movie writers, artists, and so on and so forth, right? And so I started hosting events with the Science and Entertainment Exchange, and I realized that a lot of scientists were not really good at talking about what they're doing and talking about it in a way that makes you feel why it's important, right? They can talk about the data and they can tell you statistically why it's important, but you know what they don't tell you is how they feel about what they're doing and how they feel about your opinion of what they're doing. I recognize that there was a little bit of a gap in the translation between the data, the scientists, and the rest of the people. And so that's when I kind of really jumped in. And I was like, I speak these languages. I can speak both languages. I can understand enough to translate the science into something that's accessible and entertaining and fun. And that's when I kind of really jumped in. Yeah. I mean, personally, I believe that as an artist and as an artist who is inherently an optimist, it really is important for me to see that optimistic future, right? It's really important for me to help create that optimistic future, right? And I was a ridiculous Star Trek fan, right? So for me, it's always been like I want to live in that world. Like, how do we make that happen? You know, how do we make replicators happen? How do we make tricorders happen? How do we make starships happen? Right. And I think everyone who's seen a Star Trek and picked up something and invented something that reminds them of Star Trek, I think they have that same feeling, which is like, we can do this. You know, one of the things that I loved about Star Trek is there's no money. Nobody ever talks about like taxes. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody ever talks about finance. And you know, they go, well, we don't do money anymore. Like we don't need it. You know, the wealth is in human experience, exploration, and learning. Like that's currency, you know. And it sounds good. And when you think about it, like, oh, in the future, in 100 years, in 200 years, we're going to have that, right? But who's thinking about how to get there? You know, who's thinking about what are the steps it takes to get to that place? Scientists are. You know what I'm saying? Like that's who's thinking about it. It's like artists and scientists. We're the ones thinking about that kind of stuff. How do we get to Star Trek? Which is why when it comes together, you have wonderful things like smartphones and VR headsets and tablets and you know the internet. You know, because we are trying to get to you know deep space. You know, we're trying to be able to explore that. Now, when it comes to bioengineering, like the thing that Star Trek really doesn't talk about too much is sick bay, right? Like I wrote this whole thing that one of these days somebody's gonna buy from me and it'll be on some kind of a network. But I wrote a whole Star Trek show called Starfleet Medical, right? And it really is about the bio side of the Federation because nobody talks about how there's no cancer anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
they look at these diseases in Star Trek and they just go, let's do that, synthesize that, make, and then all of a sudden there's a hypo spray and it's like, shh, done. You know what I'm saying? Like no sickness anymore. You know, the whole bio side is like, oh, we figured that out. Like we figured how to, synthesize these elements, put them together, hypospray. They don't even put it in arms. It's like over clothes. You could be wearing like a down jacket and it's like, ish, no, I'm cured. You're cured. You know what I'm saying? How do we get there? Right. And it somewhere along the line, creating the Federation, we all started trusting biology. Somewhere along the line, we all started trusting the fact that people have our best interests at heart when we're creating these things, right? But I think a lot of it is because there's a lot of mythology, especially in the West, around who we are, how we got here, what are we made of, and the mythology takes over from the research. The mythology takes over from the facts. And I don't think people really understand that there are disciplines in science, and science is not a religion. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. Science is a method, it's a way of doing things, right? The same science that built the smartphone is the science that did the corona vaccine, right? And it's not because it's bioengineering and computer software and hardware engineering. It's like the steps that it takes to find the answers are the same. And I don't think the community writ large really understands that it's the steps, right? And not necessarily the disciplines. So we have to make sure that everybody knows that we are all taking the same steps towards best interests. I think we also have to let everyone know that biology is not scary. And that is only going to come if we give agency of our biology back to us. There's so much about our biology that we don't know for a reason, right? And our biology has become industry. And, Drew and I talk about this all the time. We always talk about how everyone should have the right to their own DNA. We talk about how everyone should be able to print DNA in their living room or in their kitchen, right? We should all have access and right to DNA. But there are some things about DNA that we don't talk about or we don't understand because it's not given to us. We have to go to a Stanford or take a course like this and get that information, where in actuality, it should be every day. Like, we should all know what our DNA does. We should all be able to have access to our personal DNA information. We should all be able to know that, where it comes from, how we create it, what makes us us, how to read it. We should be able to read the, ACs, G's, and T's, just like we can read websites. It should be that accessible. But because of industry, it's kept from us. So that I can understand how there could be distrust and mistrust. Because when we start thinking about DNA, especially our DNA, we're all of a sudden we start talking about the pharmaceutical industry. We start talking about the medical industry. We're not talking about DNA anymore. Now we're talking about systems, right? The systems have nothing to do with the biology. You're trusting or distrusting the systems, right? The biology ain't do nothing to you. You know what I'm saying? The information doesn't do anything to you, but the systems do. So regardless of, how you feel and where you stand on it, what we don't trust and what needs to be articulated, it has nothing to do with the DNA. It has everything to do with the systems in place that keep our DNA information from us. For me, it first starts with this idea that science is awesome. Like, I love the awesomeness of it, and I'm blown away by it, right? I'm blown away by it. I'm blown away that this series of steps can get you to innovations that can change everything, all of us. You know, it's really amazing. It's really awesome. It's really awesome that we figured this out as human beings, you know, one chromosome away from the lesser primates, right? The lesser quote unquote primates. But we got it. Like we figured it out. And it's fantastic. And there's everything that the reason why I can make the films that I make or the things that I make, the creativity that I make, and you can feel it, it doesn't exist without somebody coming up with a medium that can distribute it, right? Even we're talking about theater, like somebody had to come up with lights, you know what I'm saying? And, you know, a room that you can have sound in and, you know, a way to you know, the mathematical angles of a rake of a stage so everybody can see what's going on. Like it's all integrated. It's all a part of it, which is why I'm not big on like separating the arts and the sciences. I think, you know, as a collaborative system, it needs to work together. But the first thing I have is like this idea of like exponential creativity and imagination. I want to see the future now. You know what I'm saying? And the best way for me to do that is to speculate on what the future could be, right? And so you'll come up with this ridiculous idea and you'll talk to a scientist and they'll be just like, oh, okay, we can do, you know what I'm saying? Like, we might not be able to do it today, but I definitely see a future in which that can be done, right? Drew has this really good talk on purple mucus. You ever hear him talk about this?
No.
Pretty dope. It's pretty dope. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, he said, imagine if you have an ailment, right?
Yeah.
And the color of your mucus can tell you what kind of ailment you have. Unreal. That is unbelievable, right? But
Yes.
from a bioengineer standpoint, bioengineers are just like, oh yeah, we can make that. Let's make that, right? And so me as an artist, as a writer, as a director, as a creator, right? I can go, hey, let me write something that has purple mucus in it, right? And take away the fear, take away the stigma. Because you see a story with that in it, you'll be like, oh wow, this is something, right? Is that really possible? And then you find somebody who can go, hey, yeah, we can do that. Okay, let's do it. And then all of a sudden, like we're all on the same page, moving towards the future together, right? But really the only way out of all of the scare is to make stories. It's the only way. We can't data our way out of it. We can't infotech our way out of it. We have to create narratives around it so people can emotionally and tangibly embrace the ideas and not be afraid of the ideas. The lack of information and the lack of creativity creates the fear, right? Making things a lot less accessible creates the fear. The not knowing makes you fearful. As soon as you know, you're just like, oh, I know what that is. I don't have to, you know, what is it? I can just go forward, you know? I once saw, I was looking at a website and I was talking to a bioengineer and he was talking about, he put up on the screen the DNA makeup of anthrax. And he was like, oh, you can make anthrax in your fucking bedroom. You know what I'm saying? Like, here it is. Here's the DNA, right? And the way he talked about it, I was just like, oh, okay, that's cool. And it moved on, right? But the way the narrative gets weaved, anthrax available in your bedroom, news at 11, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not the thing that we're scared of, it's the story. You know, the story that we're being fed is what puts us in fear, right? This whole Halloween, everybody was talking about fentanyl in your Halloween candy, more at 10. There was not nary a fentanyl anywhere trick or treat wise, nowhere, right? But the story, because it hits that reptilian part of our brain, right? The story makes you go, Halloween candy, fentanyl, them damn scientists are up to it again. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not what it, that's just not the reality of it. You know, that's not the reality of it. But the hard part is like scientists um, don't really know how to say, what the fuck is wrong with y'all? Like, we don't want, we don't spend 20 years after high school sitting around trying to kill everybody. Like that's not what scientists do. Like it's just, you know, you're talking about very introverted people who like to sit at a desk looking through microscopes. Like that guy is not dangerous. You're not the Joker. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like it just doesn't. No scientist that I've ever met has been like, now I know. You know, I can eradicate the entire world. It's more like, oh, I found a new bacteria. Ain't that cool? You know? But it really is about being just completely in wonder of the things that we can do and make and building stories around that, you know, and building stories around that and getting that word out there. That's why Star Trek is so influential. You know, Star Trek is Star Trek because they were just like, we figured it out and now we're in, you know, the alpha quadrant. You know what I'm saying? Like we out there now. Yeah, a couple of things. One, I think we should have cool hunters out there who find like cool things about science and bring them to artists, right? Because I think, especially as for bioengineers, the arts is a perfect way to get that message out, right? Because materials are expensive. And if you have access to cheaper materials that are sustainable, that last longer, that's going to completely change the game, right? I think a great way to come about bioengineering is food. And we don't really look at food as bioengineers as a way into bioengineering. I think developing specifically like kitchen appliances that turn bioengineering into like everyday practices would help the narrative and it would help get people interested and it would employ a lot of bioengineers, right? Because you can start thinking about ways to like, you know, engineer a steak and save a cow. You know what I'm saying? Star Trek, the replicator was like that changed everything, right? The fact that you can create these objects from nothing, right? From just create, you know, mass out of no mass, right? Create matter out of antimatter, right? That's the dream. Let's start making things that we can put in our world that kind of moves us towards replicators, right? Let's have let's have 3D printers that can build us our mushroom shoes. You know what I'm saying? In the crib. Now, right now, it might take 3 days to build one shoe, right? The way we distribute the pattern of the shoe is you're buying the creativity, right? You're buying the pattern and you're downloading the pattern, and the material is mushrooms. You just throw mushrooms in the hopper, and in 3 days, in a week, you have a brand new pair of Jordans. You know what I'm saying? Like those kind of ways to turn that bioengineering into like these everyday kind of things is the way in, I think. The first thing that's blowing me away, I have to say, like the COVID vaccine was pretty huge. It was pretty huge. I mean, I can't talk about it enough. Um, that is just a feat of science that is kind of a once in a lifetime thing. And it happened in such a unique and collaborative way. Like, you know, a lot of people aren't in rooms with a lot of professional scientists, but it's kind of crazy, you know, like every scientist thinks the other scientist isn't doing enough in their science. Every scientist thinks that their research is better than the other scientist's research. And so there's this yelling back and forth of like, you think you can do my job? You know what I'm saying? And it's this volatile, like very kinetic, very adversarial space, right? But when it's time to make something, everybody shuts up, puts all their data in the pool, and they make the thing. And everybody else is thinking that we're trying to make designer babies. Like that doesn't. We're already doing that. We don't need DNA synthesis to do that. You know, we do it in the club. You do it at the bar. Like when you find somebody like I want to have children with you, that's what you're doing. You're designing your children. You know what I'm saying? Like we're already doing it. So we don't need magical potions to do that, you know? But the fact that the world came together and did this thing is incredible. And so what's and bioengineering is actually coming of age right now, right? It's becoming kind of the science of now. It used to be like space exploration, and then it was like astrophysics, and then it was quantum physics, right? We're kind of moving into the age of biology. We're moving into the age of bioengineering, and we're going to start seeing more and more things talking about bioengineering and biology. Right? We're going to see more and more people doing it. We're going to see more and more stories about it, and stories about it as a good thing, right? And not as a bad thing, not as like genetically enhanced human beings, you know what I'm saying? Or genetically engineered. We're all genetically engineered. Like the, you know what I'm saying? Like the way we think about it is gonna change, right? And it's gonna change. We're gonna see many more purple mucus stories, right? It's really coming of age right now. So I'm trying to get my hands on as much information as possible, which is why I'm talking to Drew all the time, right? Because he's, you know, he kind of is the godfather of synthetic biology, and he has such a creative imagination, and you know, I think our relationship works because everything he says, I'm just like, that is the most amazing thing I've ever heard in my life. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just everything is just so mind blowing. So there's so much that's exciting about synthetic biology. When I walked through Drew's lab at Stanford, right? Because we were co-teaching a class together at Stanford, and which is how we really became friends. And then I walked through his lab at Stanford, and he showed me the DNA printer, and I was just like, "Can I have one of these? You know, I want one of these." You know, and he was like, "I don't see why not." You know, and I was just like, I would love a DNA printer. I didn't even know that was a possibility until I walked around his lab, right? Then he showed me the 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 gene delivery like internet, where you can like order a gene and it'll come to your house and you can do experiments. And I was just like, there's a world out there of like people who are interested in this and who are doing this work. And then one of Drew's students named David Kong, he teaches at MIT, he's also become a very dear friend. And he does this thing called the Bio Summit. And it's a lot of bioengineers, synthetic biologists, and bioengineer hobbyists, like people without PhDs, but who really love bioengineering. And it's just a summit of everybody kind of getting together and talking about this thing and talking about what's possible, talking about what's next. And I did my first bio summit last year, and I just loved it, and it was incredible. And just the fact that there's this coalition of people out there who are, you know, spinning ideas in biology is just incredibly exciting to me. And it's just a whole new world that I didn't know existed, and now I'm glad it exists. You know, because they're taking away the stigma of it, you know, one person at a time, and they're making it accessible. I think the accessibility to bioengineering is a big deal. I think it needs to be way more accessible, because the more people who have their hands on it, the more good you can do. And, you know, I inherently believe that there is more good out there to be done, and more people who are willing to be who are willing to do good. Well, yeah, I mean, I started writing this play about two people who live on the moon, right? And they're in inherently like running an archive. They're running an archive of the Earth on the moon. So they're taking all of these things and all of this information and storing it on the moon just in case the Earth blows up, right? And so the play is about them thinking that their job is like as librarians, they're just boring and they're mundane, and then all of a sudden the Earth blows up, and they're like, "Holy!" The day that we never thought would happen would happen. Like, what? Now what? Like, and the whole play is about that question. Like, now what? Now what do we do? And throughout the play, they're making sure that the things that they have up on the moon are sustainable, right? Because now there's no pipeline between the Earth and the moon. And so as they are doing these things, they're talking about how much sunlight they can get to their plants, because the plants are the lights. And it came from the same kind of idea of, bioluminescent African violets, right? And so I have a scene where they're carrying these, small, buds of trees, but they're all like lit up. They're bright. And when you're on stage, you can just find, you can build up something that looks like a tree and just throw a light in there, right? And in the scene, they're just carrying these things like it's no big deal because they see them every day, right? But on stage, what happens is the stage is lit by these trees, by these lights. And the question is like, what if all our lights were trees, right? What if photosynthesis provided the energy to trees, and when the sun went down, the trees just lit up, and those were our streetlights, right? Rather than taking energy from the grid, rather than burning coal, rather than having these metallic streetlights in the middle of the city, all you have to do is plant a tree, right? That's how I'm using that to inform the storytelling, right? And in this idea, it's just like, oh, we just figured these things, we figured it out. We just grow these trees, right? And so when you see these like little baby trees that are lit up, just being put on shelves, and them talking about something mundane, you're just like, what the f- is that? Like, how does that? What is that? You know? And that's what sparks the imagination. I think a lot of times people try to shed a spotlight on things. It's not the spotlight we're paying attention to. It's what's behind the spotlight, right? It's the things that we don't say, right? It's the things that we don't point to. And sometimes it feels a little bit, unfair because, take for example, GPS. Nobody ever questions GPS, ever. You know, they're just like, well, I gotta go make a left here, make a left here, right? Well, you are talking about instantaneous information that's being beamed to you from a satellite onto your phone, integrating that into your car, and you making decisions based on that. What? That's crazy. If somebody 50 years ago saw an iPhone that's giving you directions beamed from it, they think you were from another planet. It's ridiculous. But nobody questions GPS. Everybody's fine with that, right? But the COVID vaccine, there's a microchip in it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it doesn't. It's not. It's not fair that sometimes the things get the spotlight. You know what I'm saying? Like, it always blows my mind that people go to like fascist rallies on planes or drive, and they're using like smartphones, and they're talking about how science is evil. You know what I'm saying? It's like, right, you got here through science. Like, what?
Right.
You're not putting these two things together. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got to put these two things together. So I think it's like also making bioengineering the everyday, making it so mundane that you don't even think about it, making the flu vaccine in your house, like the new flu vaccine just got downloaded to my hypo spray. Let me just do that. Let me just take that and move on. Right. Making it exclusive and putting a spotlight on it sometimes breeds the mistrust. Seeing bioengineering as like a kitchen, right? You look at a kitchen and it's a bioengineering lab, but you're just making food, right? Looking at your kitchen that way, right? Putting on, your winter boots and they're made from mushrooms. Like it's just another material. It's not super special. It's not, something that we need to be afraid of. It's just a pair of boots, you know, it's no longer burning things. You know what I'm saying? Finding, this idea of waste completely being eradicated from everything that we do. There's nothing wasteful, and we have microbes and algae and all of these things breaking down what we call waste. It's being used by something, you know what I'm saying? And it's being put back in to create this cyclical biology on this planet. That's how this planet came to be, you know. For some reason, we got knocked into a Goldilocks zone where things started growing, by chance, just by chance, all of a sudden, something biological started taking place. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're not Cybertron. We didn't, you know what I'm saying? Like, we didn't get knocked into a zone where mechanical things started growing. Biology has probably been here the longest out of everything, and it's the thing that we're destroying the fastest. So I think, my hope is recognizing the beauty and the wonder and the awesomeness of it and moving towards more of it and having it be as ubiquitous and as mundane as the smartphone. Yeah, I mean, for me, what I would say is a couple of things. One, this is probably the best time in all of human history to be alive. And as much as it doesn't feel like that, it really is. There are some things that exist right now that no other time in human history could even fathom. So this time right now is wonderful. And there are so many things to be in awe about and so many wonders you can have. Find the wonder in everything. Just keep that awe, just be awed by things. Let yourself be awed by things. And the other thing is, there are people out there who are listening to you and who are teaching you that want you to win. Your teachers aren't out here to make you look bad or make you look stupid. Your teachers out here, even if it doesn't seem like it, they want you to win the game. They want you to win. So when you challenge your teachers, know that your challenge, at the end of the challenge, you're all fighting for the same thing, which is your knowledge, right? And you to win the game and you to be the best you that there is, right? I know a lot of times when you're young, you think you know everything. I thought I knew everything when I was young. Nobody could tell me shit, and I'm from the Bronx. So I was just like, man, out of here, what you gonna teach me, right? But there were teachers out there that I just had to shut up and listen because they wanted me to win the game. And a lot of teachers won't articulate this. A lot of teachers won't tell you that they're wrong. A lot of teachers won't tell you that, they have a vested interest in your success. But they do. They have a vested interest in your success. And there are people out there in the world who have a vested interest in your success. Hold on to those people. Hold on. Hold on. Because if you listen and you talk and you dial, you don't have to agree. But if you talk and you listen, you will win the game. Whatever game you're playing, right? They want you to win, right? Hold on to the teachers that want you to win. Yeah, a couple of things. One, I'm working with the Science and Entertainment Exchange to try to make optimistic futures stories and involving science um, something even more accessible, right? And I'm trying to get as many scientists that I know into that storytelling world and that storytelling space. I'm also working with scientists to help them be better storytellers and connect with people that they're trying to reach emotionally. Um, one of the big things about the COVID vaccine that people don't hear, that I hear, is how much time scientists spent away from their families. How many sleepless nights? How many birthday parties? How many anniversaries? How many weddings? They all missed those things because they were trying to keep us all alive. And we don't hear about that, right? We don't hear about their sacrifice. We don't hear about their struggles. We don't hear about them every day, seeing millions of people dying and it keeping them up at night because they go, I need to get to the lab and try this. That was that they are driven as everyone else is about everything else, right? As driven as Elon Musk is about being an, right? As driven as finance guys are about the economy. These people were driven to come up with this vaccine. They spent sleepless nights every day and night feeling guilt and stress and pain, taking time away from their families to make this thing. So I'm trying to get that story out there as much as I possibly can. And I think when people really engage with scientists emotionally, they really understand that they're people who have a passion and aptitude for something, and it's not otherworldly. It's not untouchable. It's not intangible. It's like your neighbor. Your neighbor is a research scientist, and they're spending time away from their families just to make the world better. Yeah. So I'm really working on getting those stories out. And then I'm working on, I'm actually going to do a panel at the Sundance Film Festival this year with Drew, talking about optimistic futures and storytelling. So it's like really getting the word out there that the future doesn't have to be this desolate, barren, dystopian Mad Max, like we up the earth. Everybody survived with like trying to find water and a shotgun. You know what I'm saying? Like it could really be something quite special. Our street lights could be trees. Yeah, it could be. And so getting more people to tell those kinds of stories is what I'm working on right now and I'm really passionate about.